Hi everyone, hopefully we should be live now and you can hear me okay. Just wanted to quickly introduce myself before we get started. I'm Dan, I'm going to be your host today. We're really excited for you all to see Danny's presentation on PDF accessibility, the war on PDFs. We've had a really great response for this topic, really brilliant to see how many people are interested in how we can go forward with producing more inclusive and accessible content. Just before I pass on to Danny, I also just wanted to highlight Alex, who's going to be in our Q&A session today. He's going to be answering your questions throughout the presentation. So Alex is one of our designers. He's been a really important figure in spearheading our own PDF accessibility checklist, and hopefully will be able to help answer some of your more kind of design needs. There will also be time at the end of the webinar itself to ask Danny any questions that you have. So for now, I'm going to pass over to Danny to get us started.
Welcome, everyone. So thanks, Dan. We've got people from all over the world joining us. It's great. And as Dan said, it truly is a fascinating topic, PDFs. So without further ado, I'll just introduce you to the content of the talk today. So I'm going to start off by exploring, is there a war at all on PDFs, the internet generally and accessibility, exploring whether PDFs in the web are broken, what sort of PDFs, what role do PDFs have in the world today? So it's quite an interesting point, as well as inclusive design, and then what methodologies we can use to make content a lot more accessible to our users. So just a few words about myself. I've had a really strong interest in computing and design since the 80s. When I was a kid, I started practicing web design, web development, and technologies like Flash in the late 90s. I then went out in the early 2000s and did a master's degree in interactive media, or creative technology as it's called today. That's kind of where I really specialized in UX in the early 2000s. I then started CyberDuck 16 years ago to bridge the gap between design, technology, content, and marketing. So yeah, we're really passionate at CyberDuck about accessible design and design that works with the right sort of technology behind it. So yeah, so is there really a war on PDFs today? So where did this all start? One evening, I changed a nappy, I went for a run, came home and saw a tweet that really made me think. The person that wrote the tweet is a civil sort of servant at government digital services, and he basically said that the war on PDFs, being a primary format on gov.uk, is finally over. So that really provoked quite an interesting reaction in me. I then decided to explore the topic in a lot more detail. So early this year, I wrote an article about, is it the death of the PDF? Not quite, but it's great news for accessibility. So I really wanted to explore sort of CyberDuck's perspective on inclusive design and how this all fits into the new legislations that were coming out. So that's kind of just the background to this talk and to my thinking, really. A bit more about CyberDuck. So we're a digital agency focused on digital transformation through great UX and robust technology. We started in 2005. We're hitting 80 staff now. We've got ISO accredited processes in design, UX, and web development. And we've got our headquarters is in Hertfordshire in the UK. And our values as a business are inclusiveness, excellence. We're selfless, relentless, and adaptive to the world around us. In terms of people with disabilities, so 1 billion people today live with some form of disability. That doesn't include people who are not reporting their disabilities, and that number may include temporary disabilities as well. So around 15% of the global population have some form of disability that impacts their ability to engage with digital in some shape or form. So obviously, if you think about the buying power, you know, how much money sort of those people can generate altogether, it's incredible. But essentially 1 in 5 people in the UK have some type of disability, and 1 in 4 people in the US have some type of disability as well. So this leads to a question: are we moving to an accessible internet? So first of all, how can we live without the internet? No other invention has been more pivotal since the Gutenberg printing press in the 1400s. And for most of us, the entire world is visible, audible, and pretty much at our fingertips online. But people with disabilities have huge challenges online. But it's still one of the best things that has ever happened to people with disabilities. This particular image is from the London Olympics, when Tim Berners-Lee was sort of celebrating the birth of the World Wide Web as one of the greatest British inventions. I just wanted to play this short video from, I think it's 2006, of a user, a sort of disabled user, benefiting from the internet and how it's been empowering for him.
David Morris is the Senior Policy Advisor at the Greater London Authority, advising the London's Mayor on accessibility issues. He has spinal muscular atrophy and uses a number of technologies to get on with his busy schedule. But his favourite one is voice recognition, accompanied with a Bluetooth headset. He's been using speech recognition software for almost 10 years and currently uses Dragon Naturally Speaking.
Voice-activated software enables me to actually compete on an equal basis, and in fact probably gives me an advantage, because those people who are smart know that voice-activated software has reached a point now where it's very functional.
Speech recognition software generally needs a bit of training before it can be used, which puts most people off. But the recently released Dragon Naturally Speaking version 9 claims that it's overcome that hurdle and now can be used straight out of the box. The BlackBerry is another bit of kit that David has in his bag. Although he likes the great functions, he believes the design could be improved for many people, disabled and left-handed.
For the first time in a long time, I can access a keyboard. It's also really inaccessible to me as a one-handed, left-handed person with a stupid jog wheel, which is really difficult to use. So I have to turn it upside down, and it's a strange way of accessing emails, but it's still very important.
So this puts things into perspective, showing someone with disabilities really being a very productive member of society, but still struggling with certain aspects of usability. It's important to remember that this is just not about permanent disabilities. There's something called situational impairments or situational disabilities as well. So a good example is motor impairments, where, for example, when I was had a baby, I used to look after the baby a lot, and I pretty much found myself just with one hand, because I was constantly carrying a baby, trying to use the laptop, trying to use my phone, obviously working a lot from home with the baby. So all of a sudden I had a situational impairment. Equally, I'm sure you guys know that when someone has like cataracts, their vision drops as well. So it's all of a sudden they have a situational sight impairment as well. So yeah, it's more than just about permanent disabilities. Many of us can experience a situational impairment at some point. So when we're thinking about content, we need to think about these users as well. So how does this sort of accessibility fit into my world? So obviously at CyberDuck, we have some fantastic clients. One of them is Sport England, where we've helped them to re-platform, taking multiple websites with thousands of web pages, thousands of PDFs, and just helping them to make a better experience. So this is a screenshot of the new website. The work that we have with the client is ongoing. So in this particular slide here, it's basically a usability test with a blind user, and basically what the blind user experience is that the PDFs, and this is before the PDFs have been optimized, because again you have like two types of PDFs, optimized PDFs and non-optimized PDFs. But in this instance here, the PDFs were accessible, but they were quite fiddly for the user, as we'll see in a minute. The keyboard shortcuts did not work for him, unlike in HTML. And with this particular PDF, the blind user needed to be familiar with the document first, because there wasn't sort of a table of content, so they couldn't sort of move around at ease. And obviously, one lesson here is PDFs should always have tables of content. So I just want to play another video where it shows the blind user engaging with a non-optimized PDF on an iPhone using Apple voice over software.
And of course, this is very fascinating.
Not going back to where we were before. As we recover together, we want to come back more inclusive and more relevant. Despite more than 100,000 organizations nationwide delivering a wide range of sport and physical activity offers, many people and communities still feel excluded, often unconsciously but sometimes not. When this happens at a grassroots level, it also means our talent pathways and national teams don't represent our nation's diversity. We need, together, to call this out and change this inequality. Alongside the challenge of inequality, and perhaps because of it, many sports and activities are in long-term decline. All activity matters, but for tens of millions of people, being active depends on organized sport and physical activity. By organized, we mean arranged by people. It could be anything from an exercise class or a walking group to a partner or a Sunday league football game, offered by a huge network. They're the beating heart of communities.
Just to summarize, the PDF on the mobile is the hardest in terms of accessibility, the least smooth. Then a PDF on a desktop, and the smoothest experience of all of them is an HTML on a desktop.
So we asked the users to rate, this particular blind user, to rate the user experience of all of the different formats. So basically, HTML desktop was king, so that pretty much got the highest score, was an extremely smooth user experience. He was using the JAWS screen reader. Number 2 was mobile on a HTML mobile website. Again, was very smooth, very easy for him to use. The desktop PDF was usable, so he said it was usable. And again, remember, this is before CyberDuck have worked with the client to optimize the PDF. And then the worst kind of experience for him was on the iPhone trying to view a PDF using a screen reader. So that was the worst possible experience. And it is, again, I'm sort of caveating this, saying that the PDFs here were not optimized like the website was. So are PDFs in the web broken? Before we answer that question, let's just look at why the PDF was invented. If some of you remember the early 90s, people were sending each other lots of different formats. It was very, very hard, really, before PDFs to guarantee that someone could actually open a document. Equally, even in those days, how websites were coded, it was a bit of a hit and miss as well, where the early browsers didn't do the best job with compatibility. So quite often, a website was developed for Internet Explorer and not for Netscape. It was a challenge. And obviously people like John Warnock, who is one of the co-founders of the PDF format, even in 2013, he said that HTML was a joke, and they spent 20 years trying to fix HTML and they're still not there yet. So it's obviously not very nice words about HTML. And this is about 8 years ago. So when the web was a very sort of mature medium, so it's quite interesting to hear the background. But essentially PDFs exist because it's a universal standard for consistent print design. So it just means that you can generate the file, and wherever you print it, it will always have the same design. It's also a standardized format, so it's recognized by governments and lots of other official organizations all over the world. They're also portable documents, so they're easy to send, they're easy to print. You can save them, you can archive them, read them offline. And you almost know that when you open them, they're not going to change, because nobody has permission to change them, and they're not plugged into any particular software. They're also a scannable format. So typically, if you have Acrobat Professional and you scan the PDF, you can then use something called optical character recognition, which takes the text and digitizes it as well. The other reason that PDFs exist is they're relatively or extremely easy to produce. So anybody that can use Word can create a PDF. That's how easy they are to use. So obviously it's 2021, you would have thought that the world has sort of moved on and that PDFs aren't that popular. But actually, according to Adobe's VP of Engineering, there are 2.5 trillion PDFs document in the world. And if you type like, how do I convert to? The PDF has overtaken Catholicism, which is fascinating. On the more sort of serious notes, you can see that since 2004, the volume of PDFs being searched is absolutely rising. So you can see that they're not becoming less popular for sure. And that's what Google Trends is telling us. So there's a lot of chatter online saying that PDFs are not accessible. So I guess the question is, do they have a role in the future of the web? But before we answer that question, we need to look at the web generally. So because according to a lot of studies, like this particular one, 98% of navigation menus on HTML websites still do not work optimally for disabled users, and 97% of top websites fail the ADA web accessibility guidelines as well. So content is still not compliant. So just to sort of unpack this PDF dilemma, the internet is not just about PDFs. Users still publish other documents and put them online, like Word docs, EPUB files as well. And some industries require PDFs for annual reports, depending on publishers' abilities. When I talk about publishers, it's organizations like ours. Some of us may prefer to create PDFs simply because it's easier, and it's easier for us to create a PDF document than, let's say, an HTML file. One thing that we know for sure about PDFs is testing is very hard. So the tool validation that exists, we'll talk about this a bit later, is still not enough. There still needs to be manual testing. And PDFs are still popular, so they're not going away according to the data. And in stock markets, like annual reports are driving this PDF boom that we have. It's probably because of the print heritage and the fact that PDFs are seen as a safe, almost like unhackable format, right? And this isn't just me saying it. According to a lot of the user research that we do, even with blind users and visually impaired users, they themselves will create PDFs documents with their own data because they see the PDF as being this kind of robust file that can't be manipulated, with a guarantee that in 10 years, when you want to open a file, it's still there with your data and nobody can change it. So there are some changes. So for example, EU listed businesses now need to produce their annual reports in a format called SF, which is an XHTML file. So there are some things that are happening basically where PDFs are being removed as let's say a standard. But according to the research that we've been doing, certain visually impaired users still prefer PDFs as kind of long form contents, because if you open, for example, a PDF document on Apple Books and you get to, let's say, page 88, and you close down the app, close down your iPad and reopen it, you'll come back to the same place that you were before. So it's features like that the PDF has that are still seen as very beneficial, even to people that are blind. It's quite interesting. But the problem is that a lot of PDFs that are being produced are still inaccessible. So in this example here, you can see that the contents in Acrobat Professional is not actually, it's actually images. It's not actually machine readable. They didn't use optical character recognition to basically almost break down the content and turn it into digital words, which means that somebody with a screen reader will not be able to understand what's in this document, because blind users use screen readers to read out documents. So in the UK now, PDFs, if you are creating a PDF, they need to comply with 2018 accessibility requirements. So this is kind of where the government's service standards come into play here. So this is why a lot of organizations at the moment are going through this kind of PDF transformation exercise, where they're either turning them into HTML files or they're having to kind of make them more accessible. And similar things are happening in America with Section 508, where PDFs have to be machine readable. So what I said before about optical character recognition, and PDFs need to be tagged correctly and structured correctly with a logical reading order. So it's interesting to see this happen on both sides of the pond as well. And despite all of these amazing strides that the government is making with its digital services, there are still remnants of exclusion. Like in this instance here from 2 months ago, a blind lady sued the British government for not making enough effort to give her content about COVID regulations. So basically, instead of sending her emails or audio files, she was basically provided with postal information or printed information about COVID, which in her view just wasn't good enough. And she said that she felt that she was excluded and she couldn't actually read the content and had to get her neighbor to help her. So there's still obviously a learning curve going on here. So the war on PDFs is a symptom of a wider problem. Are we in fact obsessing over the wrong issue? There are other symptoms like inaccessible HTML, apps, and even inaccessible books. The war should not be on PDFs. The war should not even be a war, but a battle for inclusivity. We can only succeed if we collaborate with users with disabilities, and really everything that we produce has to be tested with these people to make sure that they can extract value from what we're producing and actually understand the content and engage with it. And despite all of this legislation, visually impaired users are still not a priority for the private sector as well. So in this particular study in America, they found that 44% of blind people are employed compared to 77% of those without disabilities. So there's still a lot of imbalance here. But blind users make a huge contribution to our society, from software engineers all the way to musicians and artists to Olympic athletes. And I think part of the problem is that it's very hard for people with visual impairments and blind people in particular to apply to jobs. This is kind of why there's a huge increase in lawsuits from blind users and activists, basically making claims that they can't apply for jobs because the web forms are not accessible and they can't read the information about the jobs. So what is the answer? This is where inclusive design is really important. And inclusive design actually recognizes that accessibility and inclusive design benefits everybody. And if everybody lives long enough, they'll experience at least one eye condition in their lifetime. At the moment, 2.4% of Americans are blind or have low vision. So it just gives you some perspective. And it's not just about blind users. As designers, we need to cater for 4 very different types of kind of almost abilities. So obviously sight, which we've talked about quite a lot, motor, which is the use of limbs or kind of the ability to use our arms and legs, the cognitive side, so the ability to process information quickly and read and understand things, and then auditory, which is obviously our hearing ability. And to make things better for these people and for ourselves, we need to transform on a social, attitudinal, and environmental level. And the environmental level isn't just about the physical environment, it's also about the digital environment, the internet. So it's not just about people with a wheelchair going into a building, it's about somebody going onto your website and quickly being able to find and access the information that they want in the format that they prefer. Again, just to give you some sense of kind of bird's eye view here, at least 2.2 billion people in the world have a near or distant visual impairment, and low vision users are continuing to struggle. And the interesting thing is assistive technology is also changing. Screen readers and kind of audiobooks are gradually replacing Braille. both in the UK and the US, to a point now where less than 10% of Americans now even use Braille. And obviously audiobooks are a huge kind of boon to people who are blind, in the sense that they're being used massively. And EPUB is a new format, or relatively new format. I think it's been around for 10 or 15 years now, but it's being substituted. It's substituting now PDFs as the format of choice for books. The good thing about an EPUB format is that essentially you can reflow text, and users can manipulate the visualization within the EPUB book, unlike a PDF. So they can basically change the presentations. There's lots of discussions at the moment about whether EPUB is better than PDF, but obviously, you know, EPUB is winning kind of this whole kind of EPUB versus PDF war. So can accessibility benefit from mainstream technology? So mainstream technology like Alexa wasn't invented to help blind users and visually impaired users. It was actually invented as a mainstream product. But it does help people with low vision to set reminders, check the weather, get the news, interact with the Internet of Things, manage their calendars, and even listen to audiobooks. So I just wanted to play this quick video for you.
Alexa, what's the time? It's 6 a.m. Alexa, what's the weather like right now? Currently, it's light rain.
So technology like Alexa has been absolutely incredible for people with visual impairments and blind users, but it still has its limitations, and so does other competing technology like Google Home, for example, and even Siri. And these particular screenshots from Reddit, so it's on the left-hand side, you can see that this particular user was trying to understand if they can get their Amazon Echo to read PDFs, and it is possible, but it's extremely hacky, where you have to sort of do all sorts of things to do it, like creating a Kindle account, emailing the PDF to your Kindle account, and then installing a skill and trying to get Alexa to do it. And then on the right-hand side, Alexa can't even read out HTML pages. It's still very hacky, and you need to do sort of install all sorts of things to try and do it. So what about assistive technology? Can it work in reverse? We saw how mainstream technology benefits people with visual impairment, but can it work in reverse? So assistive technology is technology that's been developed primarily for people with disabilities. So accessibility does benefit everyone. In this particular example here, and we'll watch this video, subtitles obviously intended to help deaf users. But actually, if we watch content with subtitles, we can actually double the chances of becoming better readers. So I just wanted to play this quick video here.
Hello, I've got a riddle for you. What takes 10 seconds, costs nothing, but could help change your child's life forever? Yes, that's it. Just turn on the subtitles. Extraordinary. Research has shown that they can double the chance of a child becoming good at reading. You don't have to tell them you're doing it. They probably won't even notice. It'll work its magic all by it.
So, yeah, this is pretty incredible stuff. And because of all of these things now, the World Web Consortium has provided a set of guidelines called the POUR guidelines. which is essentially the basis of web accessibility. And essentially what the PAW guidelines mean is that content should be perceivable, available to all the senses through technology, operable, where users can interact and manipulate the content. And also content has to be understandable and clear without confusion. And at the same time, it needs to be robust, where it works with legacy interfaces as well, and technology, as well as future kind of technology like personal assistants like Alexa and other voice readers. So where does a modern content management system fit into all of this? So I just wanted to show you one example from a content management system called Drupal, which hopefully some of you have heard of. So Drupal as a content management system is at the forefront of inclusive design, where Dries, who's the founder of Drupal, basically said that to the Drupal Foundation, accessibility has to be at the core of everything that they do, and they're absolutely committed to accessibility to a point where nothing gets signed off within the Drupal core without the accessibility team reviewing how essentially these new features or functions will impact accessibility. So there's a rallying cry around accessibility within the Drupal content management system. And there's also various contributions towards kind of the non-core modules as well. There's built-in features within Drupal that help designers and developers to create more accessible content. And they even provide the Drupal community tips on how to create better, and more accessible documents like PDFs as well. So basically what we need to do is use methodologies to make the web more accessible. So in many countries, as we've seen, governments are driving accessibility forward through inclusive design. So it's a really fascinating poster here on the left-hand side by Government Digital Services, where they're talking about, again, the poor kind of guidelines that we were talking about, where even when you're creating a prototype, you need to test those prototypes with people with dyslexia, hearing issues, ADHD, memory challenges as well. So it's really, really interesting. And there's absolutely is a very strong commitment now from governments to make content accessible, or as accessible as they can. So not all impairments and disabilities are equal. There's a massive scale. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have as designers, developers, publishers, is that not all impairments are equal. So for example, 2020 is considered the best vision, and that's what you see here at the bottom. And on the right-hand side, you'll see kind of almost, okay, so if your vision is 2020, you probably won't be using any kind of aids, right, to help you browse. Whereas if your vision is 2070, 2100, you're probably going to be using a magnifying tool like Apple Zoom, or kind of enlarging the fonts using CSS. And then if your vision is 2200, you'll probably be in the realms of like using a screen reader like JAWS or Apple VoiceOver. Now this is really kind of interesting, particularly when we think about PDFs and HTML, because each of them will behave differently depending on kind of the tool you use to help you with accessibility. So these are the sorts of things that we must think about when we're producing content and testing content as well. And I think a really kind of robust way to kind of bake this accessibility in and inclusive design in is to use design principles. So there's a really good website called principles.design. So I just picked one here as an example where it talks about a web for everyone. So when we're producing content, we really need to think about everybody, all of the types of personas that are out there with different types of disabilities as well. So using kind of design principles is a really great way of doing things. Now, at CyberDuck, we also have something called the CyberDuck Way, which essentially requires us to do a lot of research from the very beginning of a project to make sure that we kind of bake in this type of user research in with the client to allow enough time to actually do the research around our users with different disabilities, and just generally the different personas as well. We also need to leverage technology. So this is a good sort of quote from Mike Gifford, who's based in Canada. And one of the things that I was chatting to him about is like, look, on a PDF, you can sort of close it down in Apple Books and then come back to exactly where you were. What about HTML? And he was saying, look, there's something called the section sign, which allows you to do exactly the same thing in your HTML page. So it's really quite interesting, where you click on a button, close down the page, close down the browser, go back to the website, and you're pretty much returned to where you were before. So it's a pretty kind of genius feature. So we have to kind of consider how technology can help us to move forward as well. Does this mean that PDFs will disappear? So I think certain things will remain as PDFs, and this is a really key point. Like if you're producing or you've just taken a course, it's produced a certificate, what format would you choose what format would you use to save your certificate? Would it be an HTML file, a JPEG file, or a PDF, right? So I'll let you kind of answer that question. Equally, if someone is sending you a legal document that needs a wet signature, it's a 30-page document, what format would you feel most comfortable with? And at the same time, if you're creating a business plan, you want to save it on your hard drive and open it in 7 or 8 years, and let's say it's a 50-page document, what format would you choose to save that particular document in? So again, these are all really good questions. So it looks like that PDFs are going to be around for some time. That's what it looks like. So to create accessible PDFs, there are ways that you can make those PDFs more accessible. If you remember the test that we were looking at earlier, you could see that the user had various kind of feedback and comments about how that PDF could become more accessible as well. So at CyberDuck, we've created a PDF accessibility checklist. So after this presentation, we'll give you all of these resources for you to download. And there's another really good guide from the University of Washington as well for Word documents. When you're creating a document and you want to save it as a PDF in Word, there's really good guides from the University of Washington here, as well as if you're creating a document in InDesign, there's a really good guide as well here from Adobe themselves. So, I mean, one of the interesting things or most important things that you need to know is when you don't wait to get the PDF into Acrobat Professional, you need to make sure that the tools that you're using, tools like Word or InDesign, that you're actually following best practice in terms of accessibility within the tools themselves, and you're using the panels, the different accessibility panels and features, and you're using like the right color contrast, you're making things readable from the very beginning. If you just leave everything to Acrobat Professional and try and optimize it there, it's kind of too late. You need to begin the design with an accessible and inclusive mindset from the beginning. So we've also created an audit template on Airtable, which you can download from the, not download, but access from the Airtable universe. And then in terms of when you're designing with HTML, it's a much more kind of mature format for inclusive design, where if you're using Figma, which is what we use, it already has accessibility kind of kits that you can use with kind of really good patterns already built in. So I'd say in terms of kind of like the battle between HTML and PDF, obviously HTML is much more kind of mature, and it's a lot easier to create an accessible HTML page from the beginning, providing that you use like a kit like this. It's just a more mature technology for accessibility and far less kind of hacky as well. So besides obviously screen reading, kind of empowerment, what else can we do to make content more accessible? So we need to make content easier to understand. According to this particular study, the average reading age of a sizable proportion of the adult population is similar to a 9 to an 11-year-old. So that essentially means that a lot of the adult population struggle to understand content. They simply struggle, and we've all seen it before with friends and family, haven't we? So content needs to be more inclusive. So when we're creating or writing content, we must make it more inclusive. The Flesch-Kincaid's test is a kind of a test or measure that helps you to assess. It's a formula that helps you to assess how easy to understand your content is. There's quite a lot of tools online that you can sort of paste your content in there in sentences, and it will tell you how easy it is to read. But essentially, I've boiled that down for you here, just to save you time. Shorten your sentences, reduce the number of long words, write for your audience. That means research who your personas are. Make punctuation your friend. Obviously, have that structure. It's really, really important, whether it's a PDF or an HTML that you're creating. And of course, reduce the technical jargon as well. What about artificial intelligence? So how can that help us? So if we're creating like lots of, obviously, let's say hundreds of web pages with hundreds or thousands of images, you can basically use various kind of modules within Drupal to generate automatic alt tags, because alt tags are incredibly important in HTML and in PDFs. You have to have alt tags that almost signpost what's in images, because if you're a blind user and there's no alt tag, it will just say image and then just skip, and it won't actually tell the blind user using the screen reader what is in the image. So if you're publishing HTML content, you can use AI to basically kind of mass generate AI tags, which is really important. But even with HTML, you need to test. And of course, the same is true to PDFs. You have to constantly test everything. And accessibility toolbars are not a substitute for research, great design, constant testing with users' personas, and obviously disabled users as well. Don't rely on a third-party toolbar to check if your website is accessible. We still have a long way to go. Like when Prince Philip died, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago now, there was a newspaper headline saying that when the National Rail website made their website grey, which is a silly idea, but they did it, and the newspapers essentially said, oh, the website isn't accessible. But this particular prudent Twitter user actually said that the website wasn't accessible even before they made it grey. So it's quite interesting. And then sort of one last tip here. This is from Sandy Wasmer, who herself is visually impaired and has got a strong heritage as a designer and content strategist. And what essentially she's saying is be welcoming. Try and make sure that each particular user gets the valuable outcome that they actually need from the document, regardless of if it is HTML or a PDF. You have to engage with these audiences to make sure that you're designing and creating the right type of content and it's fully accessible, and you have to be welcoming. So just to sort of wrap up now, only together can we really make the web and PDFs more accessible. So obviously, as you've seen with the different guidelines in place, generally speaking, if you're a public organization in the UK, you must have an HTML equivalent now for each PDF file that you create. Consider the core principles and bake them in from the outset. There's no kind of one size fits all. Inherently, many of you will have to generate PDFs. It's just you're not going to have a way around it. But what you can do is make those PDFs a lot more accessible and provide HTML alternatives as well. At the same time, PDFs are here to stay. Again, I've mentioned the use cases during the talk. You can make the PDFs more accessible. With all of this assistive technology, you do need to get visually impaired and disabled users involved, and use specialist agencies to help you. And when producing content, consider AI both for users and obviously publishers as well. We also have another link here. Again, we're going to share the slides with you, so you'll get all of the links. This is a talk from my colleague Sylvain Reiter about baking in accessibility throughout the project lifecycle. So it's more focused on kind of HTML accessibility. I'd just like to say a big thank you, particularly to the team here at Cyberduck that have helped me so much put together these slides, as well as Mike Gifford from Civic Action, Sandy Wasmer, who we saw before, and Steve Green and his colleagues at Test Partners as well. We've got, again, the links here below for you to download. And we'll also follow up by sending you an email with all the links and a link to the slides as well. So that's me done talking, but I'll be here to answer questions for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So I'll hand over to Dan to discuss the questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Danny. It was a brilliant talk. So we've had lots and lots of questions. I know Alex has also been very busy answering lots of them. So I think one, just to get us started, is from Peter Hare, who asked, can you please explain what you mean by optimized PDF? What are the differences between optimized and non-optimized? So Alex said about, in terms of accessibility, a well-optimized PDF is one that screen readers can read with ease. The screen reader should be able to recognize live text, read the correct order of text, forms, imagery. For visually impaired users, the PDF should be able to zoom in and maintain the correct reading order. I think in terms of that, is there anything you'd like to add to that, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, Alex is 100% correct. I mean, either a PDF. I mean, when we talk about optimization, it's obviously a broad brush, right? But essentially, an optimized PDF will inherently be accessible, and assistive technology like screen readers, magnifying tools will be able to work well with those particular PDFs. Whereas a non-optimized PDF, screen reading technology, magnifying tools will not work well. You know, and it's not just about obviously magnifying tools and screen readers, even things like color contrast, you know, people with color blindness as well, people with reading kind of impairments, with cognitive challenges, you know, you need to think about all of those things. So really, the only way to kind of optimize your PDFs, you know, is to make sure that when you're creating the content, you're using the right type of templates, you're following kind of best practice, and obviously you're testing those documents with people with disabilities as well, as part of your kind of, I guess, your usability testing audience.
Yeah, great answer. We have a question here from Mary. It's actually one we have quite a bit. If I'm making a PDF, how do I make it accessible? So Alex, again, he jumped into the chat for this. The best way is to use Adobe Acrobat PDF Reader. It has a number of built-in tools called Accessibility and Action Wizard. Again, Danny, anything on top of that you'd like to add?
Yeah. So it's Acrobat Professional. So yeah, obviously it has Adobe Acrobat Professional has a lot of tools built in to optimize your PDF. Make sure, because even if you create you know, an accessible PDF in Word or InDesign, which are typically the two main softwares that are used to create PDFs, and you follow all the instructions, you still should open that PDF in Adobe Acrobat Professional. And there's various kind of accessibility analysis that you can do. So it has an accessibility panel. You know, you need to look at the tagging, the structure, and it kind of almost mimics how a screen reader will kind of almost read out the content. You know, making sure that the order is logical, and that the images, for example, have alt tags, and that text and content is kind of read out correctly, because it's very easy, I guess, for a designer to fall into a trap of trying to make things look, you know, pretty, or, you know, bombard kind of too many elements on the page, and it would then confuse, for example, a screen reader. So Acrobat Professional does provide an accessibility panel and accessibility features to optimize essentially the structure of the PDF and kind of the markup of the PDF, but it does require a lot of testing and a lot of specialist testing as well I mean, the good thing is if you're an organization and you have like thousands of PDFs, you have to kind of try and audit how many templates you have. And then if you can create an accessible template and then kind of future PDFs are created using a template that you know is accessible, it just makes things a hell of a lot easier for everybody because you're following kind of a design pattern that you know is accessible.
Great answer again. Got one here from Mike. So thanks for the presentation, really enjoyed it. I've found that Adobe Pro is really glitchy for touching up reading orders and tags. There's a lack of documentation online about how to deal with these glitches. Do you have any experiences with this? And how do you deal with common areas, e.g. text disappearing when reordering? Again, Alex said this is a question right up his street. So yes, we have found problems with Adobe Pro, sometimes with reordering content letters or images going missing. Again, I don't know, Dan, if you want to add anything on top of what Alex has just said there around glitches with Adobe Pro.
Yeah, I mean, it is buggy, you know. Obviously always make sure you have the latest version. I mean, it is worth submitting those bugs to Adobe, but we've noticed ourselves, with characters disappearing and words disappearing. I mean, sometimes you may need to change the design or the template if you're kind of struggling, because obviously it's then a question of how much time do you actually spend trying to, you know, hack the tool or trick the tool versus actually just creating a new design pattern that may not encounter those glitches. So it could be that there's something in the template that you just can't cope with. Like all software, it's inherently going to have you know, bugs and issues, really. So it just depends on kind of the source and, you know, what the design is where you're encountering that bug, you know, and is there something you can change in the design, because that might be faster than trying to fix the problem that the tool is kind of generating.
Brilliant. We have a question here from Christina, I think similar to Mary's question from before. So we have asked an agency to create and deliver an accessible PDF. When we receive it, what checks can we perform to check if it is actually accessible?
So again, really good question, Mary. So what I would say again is, you know, first of all, before you even go into Acrobat Pro, is make sure that you follow a guide, or the agency follows a guide. Obviously, we've provided you with a link which you can see on my screen now. So that particular guide will pretty much tell you if the design error is kind of followed. Once you open the source file, is that particular PDF created with kind of accessibility in mind? But obviously you can run the audits in Acrobat Professional or the reports. There's other tools that you can also use to create sort of accessibility reports of PDFs, but nothing beats, you know, a specialist kind of agency auditing or analyzing that PDF for you, as well as giving the PDF to users who are blind, like what we did with our clients. So obviously we had a number of users basically engaging with the PDFs through moderated usability studies and ethnography, and then you can actually see for yourself how accessible the PDF is. So of course you know, you can then besides obviously running moderated usability studies, you can also run further kind of ethnography. You can look at data, you can look at engagement rates as well, but nothing really beats testing and just kind of getting people with visual impairments to test the PDFs using screen readers as well. Because actually what you might find is, you know, it actually does work for people with screen readers. And if it does work well for them, then obviously, you know, you've ticked a box. But it just all depends on the content. Like obviously if you're a, you know, a firm of architects and you're creating an architectural drawing, probably that's not going to work for someone with a screen reader. So it's horses for courses, really.
Right. We have a question here from Nick. If you add supporting context on the parent page before downloading a PDF, does that help with accessibility? For example, this is a PDF poster that is intended for print and display purposes. Again, I think Alex provided a great answer to this, but be interested to hear if you have anything to add again, Danny. So hi, Nick. Yes, if you add alt text or summary meta text, it helps contextualize with the initial purpose of the PDF.
Yeah, so I think obviously if you have an HTML kind of landing page where which describes what's in the PDF, and that HTML page is AAA compliant or AAA compliant, obviously it would be hugely beneficial. And equally, when somebody opens the PDF, let's say using a screen reader, just provide an introduction, what is in this document, try and boil it down to almost like a mission statement. What is in the document? Who is the document for? And then have it straight away, have a table of content with kind of links as well, that so somebody can actually link or click or access the right area or section from the PDF, because in a lot of the PDFs that we test that don't have table of content and good intros, the users with screen readers have absolutely no idea what's in the PDF. So you kind of need to provide them with as much kind of signposting as possible. Clearly, HTML pages, again, providing that they are designed correctly, will be able to provide a good introduction to what is in the PDF before the user with the screen reader even gets to the PDF. So I think you kind of need to fight the battle in both fronts, both on the HTML kind of website and within the PDF as well. And obviously provide them with an HTML alternative for the PDF if you can.
Great. We've got another question here. Could you recommend a PDF checker if you don't have Acrobat Pro? I know Matt from our CyberDuck has jumped into this as well, saying that Microsoft Word has a built-in checker and that there are also a few other tools out there. So commonlook.com has one, checkers.eii.eu also has a PDF checker as well. I think one of our attendees, Nick, has also jumped into the chat, making a recommendation for accessforall.ch. So again, I think there's lots of additional tools out there other than Acrobat Pro to use for checking PDFs.
Yeah, I think those are the main ones from memory. So yeah, I think it's worth exploring really and seeing which one really works for you. But yeah, Acrobat Professional tends to be kind of the standard. Most people will probably use that as at least as their starting point.
Yep. I think that's all the questions that we've had. So I will look to, I guess, wrap up there. So thank you again, Danny. So thank you again, Danny. Thank you everyone for joining. It's been a really great turnout. I guess before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to add, Danny?
No, thanks a lot. I think one thing that's just worth mentioning is content audits generally help you to really assess and kind of analyze how your content is performing, whether they're PDFs or HTML. And this is certainly an area that CyberDuck will be happy to help, because a lot of our clients have thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of PDFs and HTML pages. So a content audit can really help. And obviously in the links that we've provided here below, you'll be able to see some examples, or at least it will provide you with the starting points.
Brilliant. Thank you everyone again for joining us. We hope to see you at one of our webinars in the future. Bye.